So in the last episode, we went ahead and talked about how Britain and France attempted to colonize North America and the Americas as a whole. And in this episode, we finally get to start talking about quote-unquote American history by talking about the development of the British colonies. Yay! Now, I gotta be honest here, I was trying to think of ways how I could record this episode, because, I mean, even though I'm only sticking to, like, the AP content, so I'm not spending, like, one episode, like, devoted to one colony. Like, if I did one episode per colony, that would be A, a ridiculously long episode, and B, 13 episodes of that, and I don't think you guys need to, like, be suffered through that. So then I was thinking, okay, do I combine all the colonies into one big episode, or do I spread the colonies out into a bunch of different chunks? And when I looked at all the content I have to do for the colonies, I'm flipping through them here, I got a lot of pages of notes here, so I mean, I don't know if I can do all of that, so yeah. So I ended up deciding that I would just do all the colonies in a separate video. Well, actually, let me clarify. Not all the colonies, but split up the regions and have one region per episode. So there's actually going to be, despite what you know, well, okay, let me just clarify here. So there are 3 regions for the British colonies: the New England or the Northern colonies, the Middle colonies, and the Southern colonies. And while they were all similar, each colony had various differences in geography and environmental factors that caused them to function in very different ways. Now, for the sake of this series and trying to keep it short and stuff like that, I'm also going to have 4 regions. I'm going to add a 4th region in there, and sometimes it's considered a region and sometimes it's not, but it's called the Chesapeake Bay colonies, and that makes up, I believe, Maryland and Virginia. So Maryland, Virginia are going to be talked about in this episode, and then I'll have another episode at the end of all these colony videos where we're going to be talking about the Southern colonies. So the Southern colonies can be split up as just the Southern colonies with 5 colonies, or you can split them up in the Chesapeake colonies and the Southern colonies. So that's what I'm going to be doing. So in this episode, we're going to be focusing on the Chesapeake Bay colonies. Now, the Chesapeake Bay colonies were the most populous colonies with 90% of the white population and 80% of the black population of the entire South. Not the entire, all 13 colonies, just the population of the South. So 90% of the white population of the South and 80% of the black population of the South was all located in the Chesapeake colonies. And the Chesapeake colonies relied on tobacco to survive and using the indentured servants and slaves to harvest that tobacco. So without further ado, let's get right into the podcast.
I am not throwing away my shot. I am not throwing away my shot. Yo, I'm just like my country. I'm young, scrappy, and hungry, and I'm not throwing away my shot. I'ma get a scholarship to King's College. I probably should brag, but dag, I amaze and astonish. The problem is I got a lot of brains, but no polish. I gotta holler just to be heard with every word. I drop knowledge. I'm a dominant.
This is APUSHLESS, the show where I attempt to teach the AP United States history curriculum given to me by College Board in a way that is so fun and innovative that even students that are not in APUSH want to come back and listen. That's right, there is no homework, no textbook readings, no writing, no tests, and thank God, no primary source documents. I'm your fellow student and host, Trevor Bushnell. Alright, so after a difficult start, as we talked about in the last episode, Virginia began cultivating tobacco. Now, tobacco was fairly unknown in Europe, and now the Spanish did send some tobacco to Europe in the 1500s, but tobacco was basically a very scarce luxury for Europe. However, in 1612, John Rolfe experimented with growing tobacco, and he came up with an effective solution to growing tobacco, and as such, he shipped a lot of tobacco out to Europe in 1617. Now, because tobacco was so very addictive, as it still is today, it was very, very profitable back then. And by 1700, the colonies had exported 35 million tons of tobacco per year. It was also the most important crop, not only for the Chesapeake Bay colonies, but also for the Southern colonies, and it required... And the tobacco crop even accounted for 75% of all exports in 1750. Now, the problem with cultivating tobacco is that tobacco required large tracts of land, and to make the situation worse, tobacco cultivation quickly exhausted soil nutrients, making growers seek for new land about every few years. Now, this thirst for land led to encroachments out of American Indian territories, and of course that does not lead to very great relations with the Native Americans. However, the success of tobacco established a pattern in the South of large-scale production of crops for the international market and continued on with cotton in the 19th century. Now, the reliance of the cultivation of tobacco, required lots of labor, and this paved the way for indentured servants and slaves. Before we talk about that, I want to highlight an important note, and that is the difference between agriculture in the North versus agriculture in the South and the Chesapeake Bay colonies. From the beginning, the northern and southern colonies developed different patterns of agriculture. The southern colonies focused on a few staple crops grown for export, while the northern colonies focused on smaller scale agriculture and a variety of crops. But back to the labor needed for cultivating tobacco, the leaders of the Chesapeake colonies used a variety of methods to bring workers into the New World. Immigrants came with an offer of 50 acres using the head rate system upon arrival, and it still required, but the problem was it still required immigrants to find money to get overseas, and that money was about 1 year's worth of income for those basic immigrants. Now, the lower class members also came to the New World, but with a different form of a system called indentured servitude. Essentially, indentured servitude is basically a wealthy person pays for a lower class person to come to the colonies, and that lower class person works for the wealthy farmer for around 5 to 7 years in order to pay off the debt for coming over to the colonies. Now, this system was very successful, and tens of thousands of impoverished people came over to the New World, but it struggled in the sense that it created an underclass of mistreated workers. Slaves were also brought into Virginia in 1619, but they didn't really grow into a bigger kind of form of labor until later in the 17th century. All right, let's go ahead and shift our focus over to Maryland. So Maryland was economically similar to Virginia in the fact that it used tobacco and indentured servitude, but it was first a proprietary colony in the New World by Lord Baltimore, and it was settled to create a refuge for Catholics because Catholics were being persecuted back in Europe. However, despite it being meant for Catholics, Protestants immediately outnumbered the Catholics, but the Catholics were still tolerated in Maryland. And while this colony is not actually a part of the Chesapeake Bay colonies, I want to mention it really quickly. It's North Carolina. It developed a somewhat similar economy since it was reliant on tobacco, but I'm going to discuss it later in the Southern Colonies episode. I just wanted to mention it because of its similar economy to that of Maryland and Virginia. Support for APUSHLESS comes from Google Sites. Now, as you can tell by the side project podcast of mine, I like taking on new projects because they keep me busy and entertained, especially when taking a class like APUSH. Now, this is more of a hobby for me, so I needed an easy and effective way for me to get my ideas out to the world free of charge. Now, this is where Google Sites comes into play. Google Sites is a website creator like Weebly and Squarespace that is totally free of cost, outplaying Squarespace in that regard. And aside from purchasing a domain, there's no upgrade cost to get everything Google Sites has to offer, making it better than Weebly. Their easy-to-use interface is so simple that even someone who's never had any experience coding at all can create a stunning website with Google's interface. You can even edit your website on your smart device for updating on the go. And now listeners can check out my website. Go to sites.google.com/site/APUSHLESS. That is all lowercase to get episodes, show notes, and other various resources. And go to sites.google.com to begin creating your own website free of charge.
Dear Theodosia, what to say to you? You have my eyes, you have your mother's name. When you came into the world, you cried, and it broke my heart.
Now, before I get into the normal closer that I usually talk about, I'd like to go ahead and make a notice that my episodes going up on SoundCloud are they're not going to go down, but they're going to stop being put up there because I found out that I have limited minutes with a free account, so I can't really put up my episodes there. So if you're wanting to stream my podcasts, they're going to be over on YouTube now. I just made a YouTube channel. It's called APUSHLESS. Just search for APUSHLESS and you'll find my podcasts. I have a playlist that you can just run through all the podcasts from start to finish if that's helpful to you. But go over and check out YouTube and subscribe to the APUSHLESS YouTube channel over there. And that's an alternative method for you to stream my podcasts.
Yeah, you blow us all away. Someday, someday.
Now, APUSHLESS is supported by SoundCloud, Google Sites, and YouTube. And as always, I'm your host, Trevor Bushnell. Our content supporters, as always, are the awesome Barron's AP United States History Guide, as well as McGraw-Hill's 5 Steps to a 5 AP United States History Guide. To find show notes and other resources and updates regarding my show, those can all be found over at sites.google.com/site/APUSHLESS. There are a bunch of different ways that you can get the episodes for the show. You can find it in my public OneDrive folder, which is found at the link at the sites.google.com/site/APUSHLESS/episodes. You can get the first few episodes on SoundCloud. Just search for APUSHLESS and probably through episode 10. As well as you can find our episodes on YouTube. And make sure you subscribe if you head over to YouTube and turn notifications on so you know when these podcasts go up without having to check my website. If you have any questions or would like to leave us a nice review, you can now not only do that in the comments section over on YouTube if you're on YouTube, but you can also go ahead and email me at feedback.apushless@gmail.com. We are a group of nerds based out of the Pacific Northwest town of Ferndale, Washington. I'll see you guys next week.